You're a horrible, disgusting, racist, misogynist, homophobe, Islamophobe, transphobe, piece of crap, and I want you to vote for us so that we can continue to point that out to you for 4 years while taking additional taxes from you. So shut up and get back to work. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle, and I've just summated for you the Democratic Party platform for 2020. At least that's certainly how it's starting to shape up. Our friend Kurt Schlichter, who never pulls any punches, has basically got an article at Town Hall saying that's basically what the Democrats are saying in 2020. You're a rotten, horrible person, and that's why you should vote for us, because we will raise your taxes and tell you what to do in order to improve your social standing with those of us who have nothing but contempt and disgust for you. I think it's a pretty fair argument that he's making there, guys. We saw during the last week how the moon landing is just more evidence that America is, in fact, a sort of a second kind of a rate nation in space, because even though, yes, we have technically, I suppose, we landed on the moon first, but the Soviets really deserve the credit because they had a woman astronaut back in 1963 or 4, as memory serves correctly. Of course, the woman lived in a slave state, but we shouldn't let details like that get in the way of the fact that they have a much more progressive space program than we do. Steve, I think that people have really had enough of this nonsense. I think people really, really, really had enough of it. I'm seeing it everywhere. I'm just seeing everywhere that people are sick and tired of being told that they're xenophobic by people like Representatives Omar and Ocasio-Cortez, whose entire shtick is that this is a terrible, terrible, terrible place. It's a racist place that has no respect for Muslims or Latinas. So say the Muslim and Latina representatives to the House of Representatives in the United States Congress. I mean, I don't think this is a winning strategy, personally.
I have one kid who's finished elementary school and another who will be entering 4th grade here next month. And before they hit middle school and start getting real letter grades on their report cards, they have 3 slots instead to rate their performance in their various classes. And it's something that I can't remember what the first one is. Developing, you're developing the skill, or secure. You're secure in that part of your skill set. And going back to 1988, I think it's fair to say that as a campaigner, George H.W. Bush's skill set was developing. At best, this guy was not what anybody would call a natural politician. He'd run for office and he'd lost a couple of times. He won once, which I think was Congress, not the Senate, and he didn't last very long there. He ran for president and he lost to Reagan, even though Reagan was pretty much detested by the GOP establishment and all the rest. And he spent a lot of time faithfully doing his duty in various appointed offices. And I guess what you could say about him as Reagan's vice president is he didn't commit any gaffes on the campaign trail that were so embarrassing that it torpedoed Ronald Reagan's chances. That all aside, George H.W. Bush went on to beat Mike Dukakis in 1988, 42 states to 8, I believe, with the largest electoral college victory that anyone has had since Reagan's in 1984. Nobody has topped George H.W. Bush's 1988 performance, not in the 30 years since. This for a guy whose campaign skills were developing at best. And a big part of the reason goes to the fact that Mike Dukakis was what I think it was George Will. I think it was George Will who said this. He described Mike Dukakis as the eat your peas candidate. He was kind of the judging school marm who, eat your peas. It's good for you. Got to eat your peas. Eat them. They're good for you. And nobody likes that guy. Nobody wants to vote for that guy. Nobody wants to see that guy on TV for the next 4 years. It's not what you want. In the year 2000, and I stand by this, George W. Bush was such a left-leaning Republican with this whole compassionate conservatism thing and all of these new government programs he'd want to launch, that the main reason I voted for him over Al Gore was because I could stand him more on TV than I could stand Al Gore on TV for the next 4 years. Because again, Al Gore is just this lecture, and every single syllable that comes out of that man's mouth drips with disdain of how much smarter he is than everybody that he's speaking to. And it's just, it's horrible. Well, we've gone now, I should say the Democrats have gone now, from the Eat Your Peas candidate of 1988 to the Eat Your Peas because you're a miserable, racist, homophobe, bigot candidate. And I don't think that message is going to sell either, Bill.
Yeah, it's kind of like they've gone from the Eat Your Peas party to the Here Comes Your Pea Enema party, and and you're going to enjoy it too.
There's a website for that. Don't click.
Scotty, Kurt goes on to point out that that much like in 1984 with the story of Animal Farm, where the horse, which is the dedicated socialist, the guy who's always there to do the work and so on, works himself literally to death for the cause. Then he's taken out as soon as he becomes useless and turned into glue. What Kurt's carrying, really kind of capturing in this article is, not only do we hate you, but we depend upon you to continue to work, to pay taxes, so that we can distribute this money to buy some more votes so we can tell you more about how much we hate you. And
it's Amway with elections.
It really is. And this is the thing that's so amazing to me, Scott, is, I mean, Kurtz used the term normals or normies or so on, and basically the entire progressive movement is predicated on making good people feel guilty about things they didn't do, because they're decent people and they don't want to be bad people. And I think there's a limit to how much insulting and hectoring you can do to good people before it begins to dawn on them that this is not a question of me trying to right some wrong because I'm a decent person. I am being taken advantage of. My kindness and my trust in people is being manipulated in order to enslave me, and I think we're reaching that point very, very quickly.
It is almost as if they are saying the insults and denigration against you and your way of life will continue until you vote for us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's
then it will continue too.
Yeah, well, unfortunately it does. And I think that's kind of an absurd expectation. It's funny because when I was running for office, I would tell some of my colleagues who were trying to help me campaign sometime, if you're going door to door, don't go to the door and insult Nancy Pelosi. And they said, well, why not? Because she's terrible for the country. And I said, I agree, she's terrible for the country. But when you're insulting Nancy Pelosi, there's an association and a bond that is formed between voters and their party and voters and the representatives of their party that you can't fully grasp. And so when you lash out at Nancy Pelosi, you're really lashing out at that guy's grandma or grandfather who was a registered Democrat and voted Democrat all his life. And you have unintentionally perhaps picked a scab there. You've offended somebody. If you're trying to win somebody to your point of view, the last thing in the world you want to do is try to insult them. I made a note to myself here that says, it sounds like the Democrats Party is trying to speak to our highest aspirations if our highest aspirations were to not suck. And I think that this kind of the soft bigotry of low expectations of the American public. Now, if you get a full-orbed view of some of these candidates and watch all their speeches, you'll realize that a lot of the clips we see are being culled and cultivated and artisanally selected, as Steve would say, for broadcast on our favorite news sources. And so we tend to see the worst of the worst. And if you watch their full speeches, you'd probably go, oh, well, there were times when they almost soared to mediocrity. But I think that there is...
What a great phrase.
It's not a good strategy for anybody to try to win someone else to their point of view by insulting them and their way of life. And I think that applies equally well to Republicans as it does to Democrats. if you're one of those people who somehow slipped into the room and are watching this show, and you're a supporter of people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Rashida Tlaib or whatever, my message to you isn't that you're a bad person because you like them. My message to you is get to know them. Get to know what they really stand for. Follow through on your instinctive sort of, the initial Instagram impression where you go, oh, she seems pretty cool. And find out how what she is advocating would square with your way of life. Find out whether your aspirations are best served by somebody who aspires to control your behavior or to limit your choices. That kind of message is basically saying, I value you more than I value the politicians. And if you really want to make a vote that counts, vote according to your best aspirations to the best future for your family. And I think if people are willing to listen to that message and go beyond surface level impressions, then I think a lot more votes will go in the way of liberty.
I think you can make a pretty compelling case that the current position of the progressives in America is in fact a vindication for just how far this country has come to addressing whatever injustices it may have had, and it certainly had as any other group of actual humans on Earth have had. And what I mean by that is this: if all you have now to demand a societal change is that you are a monster because you don't believe that men should be able to have an abortion as well, if that's where you have to go in order to find the injustice necessary to bring you to power to right this terrible wrong, it is an indication of the fact that you really don't have any serious injustices to flout around. And I don't think people much like the idea of being called a Nazi because they have a problem with stuff that is so factually absurd. Things like the director of Planned Parenthood was fired because she would not come out and say that men can have abortions too. And when you have a world that is that inverted, you now have an enormous opportunity of people to just say, you know what, I've had enough of this. I think the best way for me to describe this is the look on the faces of young women athletes who've just been beaten by 2.5 seconds by a male who says that he identifies with females. And this young athlete has been working for her entire adult life at track and field and doing all of the training and all of the hardship and all the rest of it. And now not only has she been beaten by a biological male, the part of it that is convincing me that this thing is coming to an end is watching the expression on this young woman who just came in second, tears in her eyes because she knows that she's been beaten unfairly, and watching the expression on her face when she knows that she is expected to celebrate this, that she is expected to say, no, it's very, very brave of what she did by coming out and having the courage to run as a female, because obviously since he feels like a female, then that means he is a female. And you look at the expression on the face of those young women, I've seen it many times, and they're so angry, and they're so outraged, and they're so hurt appropriately. And they know that they are required to agree with this egregious insult to them and everything that they've worked for. And I just see these faces and I just think, I just don't see how it can continue. I don't see how it can continue. I just think that they've gone completely barking mad. And folks, let me just wrap by this. If you wonder why the entire party of the Democratic Party, why the entire drift of the Democratic Party is heading to more and more and more of this, the moon landing was just something that white males did just to show off, and all of this nonsense. If you're wondering why, it's actually very simple, and you just got to think about it. The entire idea of the left is to bring either socialism or class race consciousness, whatever you want to say. The entire pitch is predicated on you need us to right these terrible wrongs. And if there are no terrible wrongs, there's no reason for the left to exist. And so they will continue to manufacture ever more ridiculous examples of how horrible you are to live in a country that has elected a black president, Muslim representatives, gay representatives. All of the things that they have tried to run on as making America miserable actually are not problems anymore. So they've got to keep ratcheting up the bile and the hatred. And I think people have had enough. I really do. And if it turns out that this wins in 2020, then that will be an indication that we are really genuinely in deep trouble. And even then it's not the end, because there are people out there who know deep down that this is in fact the greatest country in the history of the world, not because we're perfect, but because we strive to be. And that's what makes us a great nation. And I think that this is yet another sign that things are going to go very, very well for us. Kurt ends his article by basically saying, I like this quote very much. He says, we've had enough of you elitists telling us to work hard so we can pay more taxes so you can spend the money and tell us what horrible people are. And he says, in 2020, we're voting for Trump because we're voting for ourselves. I think that's exactly right. Yeah. I think that's exactly right. We're voting for ourselves, and we'll take whatever comes with this man, because this man doesn't hate the country, and he doesn't hate the people in the country, and the people who make the votes in this country, I suspect, are going to respond to that in 2020 even better than they did in 2016. So that'll do it for this edition of Right Angle, made possible by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. And if you like these messages, we not only would like to have you, we need you. We need to keep these avenues for free expression open. And we don't do commercials in these things, but they have to be paid for. And we find that is a calling for a small number of people who understand what the stakes are. And if you want to be one of those people and join a community of people who are talking about these things 24 hours a day on our magnificent website, we'd love to have you there as well. So for Steve Green, Scott Ott, and the rest of the small crew of freedom-loving patriots here at BillWhittle.com, thank you very much for spending your time with us today, and we'll see you next week on Right Angle.